The idea of food addiction, that we could be addicted to foods, or that whether food should be thought of as addictive substances. And really the question we're asking is if there's any validity in this idea about food addiction, and if the label of food addiction, the classification of food addiction as a mental disorder like addiction to hard drugs is really going to be a useful concept. So if labelling people as food addicts is useful, or if it's potentially harmful. We conducted a systematic research review of all the scientific literature which has used a questionnaire to measure food addiction. It's called the Yale Food Addiction Scale, and what we've sought to do is give a more critical examination of what it means to know the prevalence and the correlates, or the things that are associated with people's scores on this scale, on the food addiction scale, and what it means for them to be diagnosed as a food addict according to this questionnaire. So what we found is that you get quite a high prevalence estimate. The literature that uses the Yale Food Addiction Scale gives quite an alarming picture of the prevalence and psychopathology associated with this concept of food addiction. But there's very little sort of critical analysis of the data and what this really means. So what we've found is we've highlighted a number of issues or problems with this literature on food addiction to do with the definition of food addiction. So often researchers are making the assumption that food addiction exists in the first place, and we think there's a problem of this really bypasses the issue of whether food addiction it exists in the first place, whether it's a true sort of clinical disorder, along the same lines as the biomedical definition of addiction and addictive disorders. One of the key messages from our research is that the term food addiction and the concept of being addicted to food isn't helpful, and that what would be more useful is to focus on dimensions of underlying behaviour and things that motivate people's behaviour. And in particular, one thing we're focusing on is people's implicit wanting towards food. So that's their unconscious motivation to consume certain foods in the environment. And we think that focusing on these common behaviours that all people will express to some degree would provide more useful explanations for things like overconsumption, weight gain, obesity, than applying a medicalised or diagnostic label like food addiction.